Hello, good morning. My name is Edward James. I'm the Director of Content and Analysis at MEED Projects, and over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be giving you an update on the PPP project landscape in the MENA region. We'll be looking at historically the trend with PPP projects. We'll be looking currently and looking forward, and then we'll go through a couple of significant PPP projects coming up in the region. So without further ado, let's start with just to tell you where we're getting the data from. The data is sourced from MEED Projects, our online projects tracking business covering about 15,000 active projects in the MENA and Africa regions. If you want to know more about MEED Projects and how it can help you with your strategy and understanding of the PPP market in the region, please feel free to join and visit our website at meedprojects.com. Okay, so let's look at the historical trend for PPP projects in the region. As you can see here, historically speaking, the number of PPP projects in the MENA region has actually been increasing over the last 10 years, moving up from 21 projects in 2011 up to a peak of 45 PPP projects in 2019. It fell slightly in 2020, not really surprising due to COVID-19 and the pandemic, but nonetheless, you can see there's a slow, gradual upward movement in the number of PPP projects in the region. Of course, with only 45 projects at peak compared with the several thousand that are awarded each year, the PPP market is still very small. Nonetheless, it is interesting that it is gaining it is accelerating and gaining more prominence as a means of procuring projects. Perhaps even more importantly is the value of projects awarded each year in the PPP market in the MENA region. And you can see here that over the last 5 years, that's also been increasing, hitting $14 billion in 2020, although not as high as the peaks we saw in 2014 and 15. In terms of the largest markets over the last 5 years, you can see that there are 3 markets which stand out. Egypt, with approximately $9 billion of PPP projects awarded since 2016. Then Saudi Arabia and the UAE close behind. The UAE with more than $8 billion and Saudi Arabia close to $7 billion. Other markets are smaller, but do have some significant amount of activity in the past half decade. And we can see here that of the $50 billion spent in the last 5 years on PPP projects, the spending has been fairly stable year on year in each market. So it does indicate that most countries have now adopted PPP as a way forward on the delivery of projects. And as we looked at earlier, this trend is accelerating, and we can hope that over the next 5 years, we'll see even better numbers. Of course, we'll look at those shortly. Right, in terms of the largest segments or sectors in the PPP market, you can see quite clearly in these pie charts that power sector, generally speaking, so that's IPPs and water sector IWPPs, ISPPs, and so forth, are generally the most common form of PPP project in the region. Now, that's not very surprising. Governments, the off-takers, tend to guarantee the off-take, electricity and water produced by these facilities, and also the fuel supply. And of course, for developers, financiers, and contractors, that makes it a very low risk and attractive proposition. This is why historically these 2 segments have tended to be the most popular means and largest means of procuring PPP projects. Power sector and water sector are also the largest segments in terms of number of PPP projects too, you can see here quite clearly. Other markets or other segments are much smaller. Transport, which is mainly in the realm of airport development projects where demand is much more substantiated and well known. Whereas in other segments, you can see here, construction, oil, gas, industrial, much smaller in comparison, certainly with the power and water markets. But as we'll see, this is changing. Now let's take a look at the individual projects that constitute the list of PPP projects currently under execution. You can see here across different markets, and certainly in terms of very substantial projects, we can see that the power sector and water sector, as we just spoke about, is by far and away the largest single segment. You can see that the largest projects currently are almost all in that power segment, whether it's an IPP at Hasyan, the Luxor and Hamri IPPs in Egypt, a wastewater treatment plant in Kuwait, and so on. You can see that almost all of them are in that power and water segment for reasons that we've already outlined. Now let's take a look at the future outlook, because ultimately that's what we are interested in. So let's understand a little bit more detail what those main drivers are in terms of being the rationale and the principal reasons for acceleration or development of PPP projects in the region. So we've got 1 to 7 key PPP market drivers for the market. Clearly, since 2015, we've had falling oil revenues, and with lower oil revenues comes lower ability to fund projects by the governments, particularly in a market that's very much financed by the government, projects which are financed directly by the state. And you can see here that that's a clear reason for diversifying into different forms of project delivery. Governments have the ability to finance projects off book and pay over time rather than an upfront payment. Obviously, also at the same time, we've got enhanced and improved regulatory frameworks. So as the PPP market has developed, we've seen newer laws come in, better regulatory frameworks, PPP bodies to oversee project delivery and provide that fundamental statutory regulations for the delivery of projects, which makes it much easier for these schemes to move forward. Also, we've had an increasing number of PPP projects outside of the power and water sectors, those normal sectors for which PPP projects are delivered. We'll have a look at those in a minute. But as you get more PPP projects and reference points outside of those sectors, you get more confidence in the market, and whether it's developers or financiers can see that a project's been successfully delivered before. There's a lot more confidence that they can deliver on the new projects come to the market. And that's linked with a better experience and understanding of PPPs by the government, regulatory bodies, and the clients which are tendering these projects. They're understanding the risk better, they're understanding the frameworks better, and therefore, again, it gives more confidence for the projects to be delivered. Likewise, as the sector matures, governments are becoming a lot more understanding of the fact that you need to reach a middle point of risk sharing between the developers, contractors, and the clients. And when they are meeting closer to the middle, then projects can be delivered more successfully. If one side or the other is expecting the other to take too much risk, then projects have often failed in the past as a result. Banks as well, financing institutions, as PPP projects become more developed, more mature, and regulations and laws provide that fundamental basis for delivery of projects, then they're willing to lend at greater amounts and at lower rates, and that of course helps PPP project delivery. And finally, I just want to touch on the fact, talking about demand figures. So one of the main stumbling points for PPP projects in the region in the past has been the fact that it's difficult for many developers to understand what the future demand for projects will be, understanding how secure that demand is going to be, and therefore the project has often stumbled on the fact that that demand is fairly unknown. Talking about drivers, of course, but there are also still certain challenges in the market. I think it's only fair to touch on those. We talked about demand, but for certain segments such as roads and transport sectors such as metro, for railway projects, there's still a lack of adequate demand data, which does pose challenges if that demand is not guaranteed by the state or the main client. We've also seen in the region frequent changes to laws, regulations, and the PPP bodies, which are overseeing the development of PPP projects in the region. We've seen, for example, in Kuwait, several updates, the laws, changes to the PPP body. Likewise in Oman and Egypt, we're seeing disbanding of the main PPP units. And so that can sometimes create uncertainty. Of course, the development of laws and frameworks from a regulation perspective are still developing in many markets. And in some cases, it's fair to say they're not always necessarily optimum as they're looking to mature and develop and reach a final framework for these projects. Risk still can sometimes be unfairly distributed onto the developer side. Governments often expect the developers to take too much risk, and that, of course, is a major breaking point for projects. And it ties in with expectations sometimes being unrealistic in that regard. And likewise, although references are improving and increasing, still in some sectors such as roads and railway projects, for example, there are still lack of references, which does create that stumbling point again. Now let's look at the future. We've looked at the past over the last 5-10 years. Now let's look at that future market. So the last 5 years, we saw $50 billion of PPP projects awarded in the MENA region. But when we look at the pipeline of PPP projects going forward, we can see that there are more than $235 billion worth of known, announced and unplanned PPP projects across all the nations of the Middle East, North Africa and Levant regions. You can see here that Saudi Arabia is the market leader with more than $60 billion worth of known future projects, followed by then Kuwait under CAP, Iraq, which needs the private sector to come in and help develop some of its projects. And then we've got all of other markets, which do seem smaller, but most of which have more than $10 billion of PPP projects planned in a pipeline. But we can see here that Saudi Arabia is the clear leader for PPP schemes. Now, also what we see in terms of the future sector breakdown of these projects is quite interesting, because we can see here that we're moving away from desalination power as being the dominant sector and increasingly looking at other segments, whether that's houses, or villas or accommodation camps, whether it's schools, whether it's in the oil sector, mixed use projects, and in particular here, railway schemes. You can see here that the breakdown of these segments is very, very different from the previous decade when water and power projects predominated. Yes, we will see oil and gas power plants and solar facilities in particular being developed on a PPP basis, constituting about 25% of all future projects. But railways, metros in particular, are the largest particular segment going forward. And that's good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it's diversification of the PPP market to other sectors, but it's also not necessarily so good because railways and metros are proving the most problematic in terms of project delivery on that PPP basis. So we're going to see a slightly different diversification of the market going forward, which is again highly positive. Right, in terms of the breakdown of those future clients overseeing these PPP projects, you can see that CAP in Kuwait is the market leader, although CAP has already delivered on 2 PPP projects, quite significant ones, Al Zor North, IWPP, and the recently awarded Hammain wastewater treatment plant. It is still had some problems with implementing its project pipeline. Nonetheless, if it succeeds in those, there are some very significant projects coming up. Another project, a client that's in full swing with its projects is Repdo, developing the renewable energy projects in Saudi Arabia. It's already delivered, reached financial close on a number of them, and is only going to increase the number of projects coming to that market. The Public Authority for Housing Welfare is an interesting case in Kuwait. It's responsible for building affordable housing for locals in the state, and has developed already a large number of significant cities projects there. It has already successfully reached close on a number of retail and mixed-use developments in the state, and we expect that to continue going forward. Ministry of Oil in Iraq, which has already tendered a few oil refineries on that private sector basis, and is expected to continue doing so. I won't go through each one because we don't have time, but you can see it's quite a diversified list of clients from different range of countries and sectors. Right, in terms of the more granular detail, in terms of what those individual PPP projects are, we can see a list here. The Public Transport Authority in Saudi Arabia, of course, has been trying to implement the Saudi Land Bridge railway between Jeddah and Riyadh for some time, reached an MOU with the Chinese a few years ago, but we're still yet to see that really fully crystallize. Of course, we've got the round 3 of the renewable energy program in Saudi Arabia now entering full swing. We've got the Hadifa Aqaba pipeline in Iraq, an export pipeline, which is hoping to obtain private sector finance and development. The railway program in Kuwait. We've got another Zohr North IWPP in Kuwait, and so on. You can see the list here. Again, much more diversified in terms of other sectors than in the previous decade. Now let's take a look at some of the individual projects coming up. A very interesting one, which might well be the first toll road in the GCC, is the Salalah Thumrait truck road between Salalah and across the Dhofar mountains. Currently, there's a very long and tortuous road, taking 2.5 hours to complete for trucks. The idea of building a road with tunnels, viaducts will reduce that time to just 1 hour. And it's currently under procurement in terms of the RFQ for transaction advisors. There's an estimated value of about $500 million. Now, should this proceed, this will result hopefully in the development of a number of other road projects in the region. Let's go into the next project. Another significant road project and railway project will be the King Hamad Causeway, linking Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. This has already attracted a lot of interest. We had more than 70 companies attend the information meeting last year. And there is a lot of interest in this project, mainly because the understanding of the demand for this link between the two countries is quite well known thanks to the existing King Fahd Causeway. And so we are quite optimistic that this project will proceed when it eventually comes to market. Another project which is on the verge of proceeding, again, in a new segment, is the Al Ansar Hospital in Saudi Arabia, in Medina. Now, this is a project which has already reached the bidding stage. It's about $300 million, and it involves the delivery and operation of a 244-bed hospital. As far as I'm aware, no hospital development has been successfully implemented on a PPP basis in the region, although we've tried on a couple of occasions before. And again, I believe the demand is fairly secure, and therefore the project should proceed. And again, that will create that vital reference point going forward for PPP projects in the hospital sector going forward. Likewise, two projects which were recently successfully awarded, again in a new segment, are the Qatar and Saudi Arabia schools programs. Very encouraging. Again, schools have been something that the governments in the region have been looking to implement on a PPP basis for quite some time. Now we can see that they've been successfully delivered for the first time in both markets. And this again gives great confidence going forward for the PPP for the schools and educational facilities to go ahead on that basis going forward. Finally, we've got another very interesting project being implemented for the first time in this sector in the region, and that's the King Hussein Bridge Crossing Terminal. The IFC is assisting the Jordanian Ministry of Public Works and Housing on this project. It's basically a new cargo terminal and improved facilities for the border between Jordan and Israel. And again, companies have already been invited to express interest, and we're hopeful that this project will go ahead. Again, demand is fairly well known from the existing facility. So from that perspective, we're hopeful that this project can proceed. So that gives what I hope is a good overview of the trends in the PPP market, quantifying the size of the projects in the past and going forward, looking at some of the challenges and opportunities. And should you want to know more about the market, please feel free to get in touch with me. But otherwise, I'll leave it there And thank you all for your attendance today and for listening in. I hope it was of some insight for you. Thank you very much, and I hope to be speaking to you all again very soon. Thank you.